Stuka Joe here for a different kind of playthrough. This is what I called a series replay. I'm going to play a game that's been already played before. And I'm going to play this game, The Great Game, published by Legion Wargames, designed by John Gorkowski. Strategic, two-player, card-driven game about the struggle between two empires, Russia and Great Britain, during the 19th century for control and dominance in Central Asia. And this is a game that came out recently, and what I'll be doing is playing the full game. Each episode will be one turn, and each turn here represents 10 years. The whole game lasts 6 turns. And I'm going to play a game that's been played already by one of the playtesters, Richard Hecker. And he published, in written format, the playthrough in BGG. But if you want to watch this series, I recommend that you take a look at this later so that you don't suffer any spoilers effect. And the idea here is that we take a look at a playthrough that's been done by someone knowledgeable about the game, and you get not only to see the game correctly played, but also with discussions on sound strategy. And that's interesting for players that are learning the game and for other players who want to probably improve the quality of their play. So let's begin by showing the initial setups and victory conditions. Victory in this game is pretty straightforward. At the end of turn 6, the side that controls the most areas, the areas are those round and star-shaped spaces, wins the game. There's only one caveat, that spaces in Persia don't count for victory purposes. So Persia in this game is what is known as a vassal state, and it has a large standing army, up to 20 strength points, but whichever imperial power controls Persia will not get credit for Persia's spaces at the end of the game. The British plan is simple. First, to ensure that the 2 vassal states adjacent to the Raj, that is Baluchistan and Punjab, are under British control, and that can be achieved by successful play of an emissary card. That would signify through diplomatic means, or if not, through military conquest. And once these initial goals are achieved, the British will attack into southern Afghanistan to ensure that the Afghans respond, and then the British will take Kabul. The Russians will look to move into Kokand and eventually take Bokhara. This, of course, most likely through military conquest. However, if diplomacy allows, that means successful play of emissary card, the Russians will attempt to sway the Turkomans to their camp, and from there move imperial forces into Persia. And this second course of action is preferred because the first one involves the invasion and conquest of 3 vassal states. So the game starts with the 1830 turn, and we move on to round 1. Each of the sides is dealt 7 cards. Let's take a look at each of the sides' hands. Let's take a look at the Russian hand. A Martini Henry rifles and Krupp guns card, 1 hero card. And a word about hero cards in this game. When this script that we're following was written, the rules stated that hero cards had values of 3, and you see that this one has a value of 2. That was later changed. But to keep the integrity of the script, I will play this game as if hero cards had a value of 3. Just bear that in mind. Pen mightier than sword, 2 emissaries, 1 informant, and 1 spoiler card. The Russians are aware that the British don't have a great lead in numbers of officers. At the beginning of this game, actually, the British only have one more officer than the Russians. So they may not risk playing a shooting leaf card if they have one, which would make holding for the Russians the informant card as a counter not very useful. So the Russians will discard their informant card, which is placed now at the bottom of the draw pile, and a new card is drawn. And they drew a rebellion card, which is useful for the Russians, especially if the British invade Baluchistan or Punjab on their way to Afghanistan. So this Russian hand with two emissary cards will most probably dictate a more diplomatic approach to bringing vassal states into the Russian camp in this turn. So the British drew two campaign cards: the Flashman, Gunboat Diplomacy, Rebellion, an Emissary, and a spoiler card. So now each side chooses a card and places it face down on the table. And decide the card with the lowest value will have the initiative and will go first. The Russians play an emissary card with a value of 1. The Brits a flashman card with a value of 3. The Russians will have the initiative and play their card first. The Russians play the emissary card first for the text or event. So Vitkevich, who is in Tehran, is transferred to Geok Tepe. That's in the Turkomans. And that's the capital of Turkomans, with the intent of executing there an emissary die roll to sway the Turkomans to join the Russian camp. Currently, the Turkomans are neutral. The British have a spoiler card, which they could play now. That would send one of their officers for use of that officer's diplomacy rating as a die roll modifier against the emissary die roll of the Russians. The downside is if the British fail and the Russians succeed in their emissary die roll, the British officer that was sent as a spoiler is eliminated from the game. But the British decide not to play the spoiler card because this particular vassal state is near Russia in their sphere of influence. So it's not worth risking an officer now. So now we resolve the emissary die roll. We roll 1d6 and add Vitkevich's diplomatic value of 2. And with a final roll of 5 or more, Turkomans will become a vassal state under Russian control. The roll is a 6 modified to an 8, so the Russians successfully sway Turkomans under their control. And we place Russian control markers on each of Turkomans' spaces. Now the Russians just played the text or event part of the card, and now they can play the card for its value of 1. And the Russians will move 5 of the 6 Russian strength points in Orenburg across the desert, marching into slavers. And 1 strength point will be left at Orenburg. The 5 strength points reach slavers in the Turkomans, a now friendly area, but they moved across a desert connection line. So they have to conduct a desert attrition check. And because they moved 1 area, which is what is allowed by the play of a value 1 card, they also have to conduct a regular attrition check. The roll is an 8 modified to a 7, so 7 strength points are safe, and that is no problem because the Russians only moved 5. Now the Russians conduct a regular attrition check. In this case, 2d6 are rolled and 2 is added, and that's the number of strength points that are safe. The roll is a 6 modified to an 8. 8 strength points are safe, but again, the Russians don't even have that many. They have 5, so they lose no strength points to either kind of attrition. That's the end of Russian round 1. Now it's the British round number 1, and they play the Flashman card, and they decide to play the card first for the text or the event. And he can be placed in any space in British control, so he's placed in Delhi. That takes care of the event part of the Flashman card play. Note that there's only one Flashman card in the entire deck, so it is a rare occurrence that the Flashman will be played, because for it to be played for its event, the British have to draw this card. So now the British will play the card for its value of 3. Pottenger and 9 of the 12 British strength points in Delhi will march to Sindh in Baluchistan, effectively invading that vassal state. And from Sindh, they move to the fortress and capital of Baluchistan, which is Baluchi. To resolve combat in this game, each force in the space has to roll a number of dice determined by its composition. And we see, for example, that Imperial strength points roll 1 6-sided die, as well as first round rebels. And the side that has the fewer dice to roll rolls first, inflicting any losses on the other side, and then the other side rolls its dice. But if both sides roll the same number of dice, then the dice are rolled simultaneously and losses are applied simultaneously. In our particular case here, the British, which are Imperial strength points, roll 1d6, and the Baluchis, which are vassal strength points without any type of officer, roll 3d6. So the British will roll first, inflict losses on the Baluchis, and then the Baluchis will fire back if they have any forces left. Combat is resolved by rolling the appropriate number of dice, and then we subtract the value of any officer. In this case, the British would subtract 3 for the tactics value of Pottinger, and the resulting number is a number that we will subtract from the number of strength points that are firing or attacking. In this case, it's 9 British strength points. The difference is the amount of loss attributed or caused on the enemy. So we roll 1d6. The roll is a 6 modified by Pottinger's tactics value down to 3. The British have 9 strength points, so 9 minus 3 equals 6, and they inflict 6 damage points on the Baluchistan fortress. And we place the corresponding damage markers to indicate that the fortress has suffered 6 points of damage. And now the Baluchis, who have 4 strength points, fire back. They roll a 9. And of course, 9 is not less than the number of strength points they have, so they inflict no losses on the British. So the fort survives, and the British have to retreat back from where they came from, so they retreat back to Sindh. Now we must conduct an attrition check, because this is the end of the British move. This is a regular attrition check, so we roll 2d6 and add 2, and that's the number of strength points that are safe from attrition. The roll is a 7 modified to a 9, and 9 is the number of strength points that the British have, so all 9 are safe. The British have used 2 of the 3 points of the Flashman card. They have 1 point left, and they will use it to move a force consisting of 2 of the 3 strength points in Delhi that will march to Bombay as a threat to Persia in future rounds. These strength points can move over water connection lines and reach Persia as shown. Each side selects a card for round 2. Let's see what cards they are. The Russians play the Martini Henry rifles and Krupp guns card, value of 3. The British a campaign card, value of 4. So the Russians have the initiative and they will play their card first. Notice that this card has a text or an event that can only be played in the 1870s. So this card cannot be played for its event now. It can only be played either to march strength points on the map or to bring in reinforcements. And the Russians will play it for reinforcements. So the Russians receive the value of the card in strength points at their capital in Orenburg. That is 3 strength points as reinforcements. Campaign cards can only be played for reinforcement or to march strength points across the map. The text that the card has no effect on play. It's just colored text. So the British will play the card for reinforcements. And they will add 4 more strength points to Delhi, increasing their strength there to 5. Now we move to round 3. Each side selects 1 card. The Russians played Pen Mightier Than Sword with a value of 2, and the British an Emissary with a value of 1. So the British have the initiative and play their card first. The British decide to play the value of the card first and then the text. With the 1-point value, the British send Pottinger and the 9 British strength points currently at Sindh. And they march to Baluchi to finish the job of destroying the fortress there. The British roll 1d6 and modify the die roll by subtracting Pottinger's tactics rating of 3. The roll is a 1 modified to a -2. So Pottinger has 9 strength points, and the final result of -2 means that the fortress must lose 11 strength points. The fortress only has 4 left, so it is destroyed, and we place a destroyed marker on the fortress space. Because the British captured the capital of Baluchistan, that vassal state now becomes one under British control. So we place British control markers in each of its 3 spaces, and because it was captured by conquests, we now place discontent markers also in each of its spaces. And the discontent markers will signal that this is a vassal state that the Russians can play a rebellion card on to incite a rebellion against the British, who came in not as friendly visitors but as invaders. And that is the single point from the emissary card that was played by Pottinger's force. And now we must conduct the attrition die roll. The roll is an 8. We add 2 because this is a regular attrition check for a total of 10. So all 9 of Pottinger's strength points are safe. The British have already now played the value of the emissary card, and now they play the event. So the British will send an emissary to Lahore, which is the capital of the vassal state of Punjab. And they select Burns, who is currently in Delhi. He gets transferred to Lahore. And because officers are transferred for purposes of play of the emissary card, they are simply moved to the destination, and they don't have to march through connection lines. And of course, they're not subject to any attrition. And Burns has a diplomacy rating of 2 that will be added to the die roll. And the British need a 5 to bring Punjab to their side as a vassal state. As the emissary card reads in red now, the Russians may play a spoiler. The Russians do have a spoiler card. And if the British successfully bring Punjab to their camp, they would have a free path to Kabul. So the Russians play the spoiler card, so the Russians can immediately transfer one of their officers to the capital of the vassal state that is targeted, in this case Lahore, to contest the diplomacy role. The Russians have two officers on the map, Simonich with a diplomacy value of 1 and Vitkievich with a diplomacy value of 2, which is the value that would be subtracted from the die roll if he is the spoiler. The Russians select Vitkievich, who is currently in the capital of the Turkomans, and he is transferred to Lahore to contest the emissary Burns. So the British need a 5 or more. They will add Burns' diplomacy value of 2 and subtract Vitkievich's of 2. So whatever result comes out in the die roll, that'll be it. And the British roll 1d6. The result is a 4. The British fall short, and the attempt to bring Punjab to their camp fails. And Burns is eliminated. You can imagine that the Maratha imprisoned him and assigned him at least a lovely view over the Kashmir Valley. Now the Russians play Pen Mightier Than the Sword, and they will play it first for action. The Russians will move their 5 strength point column, currently at Slavers in the Turkomans, and it marches to Krasnovodsk. This is a march across a yellow connection line, across the desert. So now we conduct a desert attrition check. We roll 2d6 and subtract 1. The dice roll is a 5 modified to a 4, so only 4 of the 5 strength points are safe, and the Russians lose 1 strength point. The Russians can play 1 more point of value of the card, and they will continue moving that column this time to Giok Tepe. This is another march across the desert, signified by the yellow connecting line. So we roll 2d6 and subtract 1 for the desert attrition roll. The result is a 7 modified to a 6. 6 strength points are safe. There's only 4. So all 4 are safe. And having finished its move, now the column must roll again for the regular attrition check. 2d6 plus 2. The roll is a 6 modified to an 8. 8 strength points are safe. There's only 4 in the column, so all 4 are safe. And that's the end of round 3. Now we move on to round 4. Each side selects a card. The Russians play an emissary and the British gunboat diplomacy, so the Russians have the initiative and will play their card first. Russia will play the card for its text first and will target Persia, which is currently neutral, to try to bring Persia to the Russian camp. The Russians have forces right across the border with Turkomans, and they will designate Simonich, who's already in Tehran, to become their emissary. And per special rule, any Russian emissary who is currently in Tehran has automatically a diplomatic score of 3 for purposes of play of the emissary card. The British have a spoiler card that they could play now. They could designate Stoddard, who's already in Tehran, but he has a lowly value of 1. Or they can designate the Flashman, who has a diplomacy rating of 2. The Brits decide that they don't want to risk the Flashman because any spoiler attempt with an officer that fails eliminates that officer. So Stoddard is picked as the spoiler. The Russians need a score of 5 or more to bring Persia to their camp, and they add 3 for Simonich and subtract 1 for Stoddard's diplomacy score. So it's 1d6 with a +2. Simonich rolls a 3 modified to a 5, and the Russians successfully bring Persia to their camp. Stoddard is eliminated. So we could say that he was expelled in disgrace, but he doesn't return to the game. Now all spaces in Persia are converted to Russian control. And in addition, the Russians now get to control and place on the map the Persian army, which is composed of 20 strength points. The Russians place 6 of the 20 Persian strength points in Bushire, and that guards from a British move through the connecting lines that are blue, through the sea, through the Persian Gulf, and also it guards from a land march from the British Army, which is currently in Baluchistan. And they place the remaining 14 Persian strength points in Khorasan in order to threaten Afghanistan with such a force led by Russian officers. So the Russians, with a hand which is inferior to the British, have accomplished much more in this round than expected. So the Russians played their card, pen mightier than sword, for action for the 2 points, and now the card is left in the space where you place cards that have lasting effects, because the text reads that in the next round, and it's the British round that's coming up, the British cannot play any card for action, only for reinforcement. So the British have to play their gunboat diplomacy card, and normally you could play it to move strength points across blue connection lines, across bodies of water, but because of the pen mightier than sword text, the British have to use this card for reinforcements only. So they bring 3 strength points of reinforcements to Delhi to increase their strength there to 8 strength points. Now the game moves to the last round of the 1830 turn. This is round 5. Each of the sides selects a card. The Russians play rebellion and the British campaign, and the Russians will have the initiative and will play their card first. The Russians play the card first for its action, so they have 3 points. The first point is used to move Simonich, who is in Tehran, and he moves to Khorasan. And that spends the first action point. The second action point is used to move 2 of the 4 Russian strength points that are presently at Geoktepe. And they march to Khorasan across a green connection line. And the last point is used to move a stack consisting of Simonich, 9 strength points of Persian soldiers, and 1 strength point of Russians to Herat. Herat is a vassal state with only 1 space, and this effectively is an invasion. So we proceed to combat. The Russian force has 1 Russian strength point and 9 Persian strength points, but because it has at least 1 imperial strength point mixed with vassal strength points, it rolls 1d6, and we subtract 1 for Simonich's tactics rating. Simonich rolls a 5 modified to a 4. We subtract the 10 strength points of the Russian stack, minus 4, which is the result in the die roll, and the result is 6 strength points that the fortress at Herat loses. And we place damage markers totaling 6 there. So the fortress at Herat still has 9 strength points. The Heratis roll 3 dice. The result is an 8, and they cause a loss of 1 on the Russian stack, and that will be satisfied by eliminating one Persian strength point. And because the Russian stack could not take Herat, in this combat situation it has to withdraw back to Khorasan. Having withdrawn, now we have to roll for attrition of the Russian stack. We roll 2d6 and add 2. The roll is a 6 modified to an 8. So of the 9 strength points, 8 are safe, meaning that the stack must lose another strength point. And of course the Persians will take the hit once again and lose one of their strength points. Now the Russians have to play the card for its texts. And this is a rebellion card. So now the Russians have to target any conquered vassal state in the British camp and roll 1d6. If the result is 3 or more, that vassal state immediately rebels. So the rebellion targets Baluchistan and we roll 1d6. And the roll is a 2. That means that the rebellion is effectively suppressed before it ever began. No effect. That's the end of Russian round 5. Now it's British round 5, and they play this campaign card for 4 actions. First action is to move Flashman and the 8 strength points in Delhi. And they march to Lahore in Punjab to engage in combat with the fortress there. Notice that the Russian officer, which is currently in that space, will not influence this combat situation. So the British roll 1d6. He rolls a 1 and his tactics rating is 2. We subtract that, so the final result is a -1. So 8 British strength points minus -1 is equal to 9. 9 strength points lost by the Punjab fortress. So now the Lahore fort has been reduced to 6 strength points and it rolls 3 dice. The roll is a 10, which is not less than its current strength, so it inflicts no damage or hits on the British stack. That's the end of the combat situation, and the British were not able to take the fortress, so Flashman and his strength points have to march back to Delhi. And now we conduct the attrition die roll check. The roll is a 7, we add 2, 9, and all British strength points, which are 8, make it safely and no losses are incurred. And the British have 3 points of action left. Pottenger has 9 strength points at Baluchi. So he will leave 1 there and he will march with 8 to Sindh, and that consumes 1 action point. And from Sindh to Kandahar. And that is effectively an invasion of Afghanistan by the British. And Afghanistan has a standing army, and because the British invaded, the Russians decide where to place the strength points of this Afghan army, which is 10 strength points strong. And they are placed in Kandahar. The Afghans have no officers, so this is the familiar 1 die roll versus 3 dice rolled, and the side with that rolls 1 die roll rolls first, and that's the British. The British roll is 6, and we subtract Pottinger's tactics rating, so the final die result is a 3. The British have 8 strength points. 8 minus 3 causes a loss of 5 strength points on the Afghan side. So the Afghans effectively lose half of their strength points. And now, with 5 strength points, they roll 3d6. The roll is a 10, which is not less than the Afghans' strength, so they cause no losses on the British side. Now the Afghans have to retreat, and they retreat into Ghazni, which is friendly territory. Ghazni has a fortress with a strength of 10 strength points. There is one action point left in the campaign card, so the British will use it to chase the retreating Afghans into Ghazni and fight it out. So the British roll 1d6 and subtract Pottinger's tactics rating of 3. The roll is a 3 modified to a 0. So the Afghans lose 8 strength points because that's the strength of the British force. So the 5 strength points of the Afghan army are eliminated, and the remaining 3 points of loss will be taken by the fortress. So now the Afghans fire back. They have 7 strength points, all coming from the fortress, and they roll 3d6. The roll is a 9, which is not lower than the strength of the fortress, so this Afghan attack causes no losses. Because Pottinger was not able to destroy the fortress, he must retreat back to Kandahar. And now the British force undergoes an attrition die roll. We roll 2d6 and add 2. The roll is a 5 modified to a 7. 7 strength points are safe, but Pottinger has a force of 8. So 1 of his strength points is lost. And that's the end of round 5. Now we proceed to the end of decade phase, and we start by rolling for each officer on the map to see whether the officer will continue in the game in the next decade or he will be eliminated. We roll 1d6 and an odd result will eliminate the officer. We start with Vitkiewicz. The roll is a 3 and he is gone. Now we check for Simonich. The roll is a 6 and he stays put. Now we roll for Pottinger. A 4 and he also stays. Now we roll for the Flashman. A 2 and he also stays in the game. As for victory points and control of relevant victory spaces, the Russians controlled their spaces in their home country, that is 3, and 4 in Turkomans for a total of 7. Notice that they control Persia, but these don't count for victory point purposes. The British control the 4 spaces in the British Raj, plus the 3 they conquered of Baluchistan and Kandahar in Afghanistan, where they have a force. So they have a total so far of 8 victory points. All played and unplayed cards are now mixed with those in the draw pile. The deck is shuffled and ready to go for the next turn, which will be 1840. So we've seen a surprising turn of events for the Russians, who've had the widest streak of good fortune. Had Burns pushed through Lahore, Kabul would probably been open, and with that, the whole country would have fallen. Now Persia threatens the British, and this can be turned by play of the Persian Persuasion card, and you will see how fragile being allied to the Persians can be. But this costs time and forces, and the Russians still have the problem of too few imperial troops in play. And of course, there is that shady character of the Flashman. He, by his name, in the 1840s, this used to be a high water decade for the British. Not so in this game. Let's see. Stick around for the 1840 turn coming up. This is Stuka Joe, signing off for now. Thanks for watching.